And Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. It is said that the game of craps originated in New Orleans' French Quarter. Near to the quarter, Harrah's Casino has been hoping to roll a 7 in its bid to expand. We'll look at gambling, including the possibility of sports betting. We'll also look at the state legislature heading toward the end of its regular session. Elsewhere, a police incident in Jefferson Parish was ruled a homicide. A former police chief is ruled out from the Cantrell administration. And our Future Watch segment looks at some architecturally significant developments coming to City Park. At the table for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Michelle Hunter, reporter NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. I'm going to go first over to Stephanie, and the legislature at some point in the fairly near future is going to be wrapping up its regular session, getting ready for the special session so that we have a real budget instead of the pretend budget.
Yes. That's actually a phrase, the pretend budget, that members of the legislature have used. The governor's office has used it.
It's puzzling.
It's weird. We've never really been here before. So basically what happened is we've been in this standoff for really 2 years in terms of how to fully fund government. A lot of partisan kind of energy in this, the governor being a Democrat and opposition from the House Republicans who really have to originate any of these measures. So even though there's kind of a more cooperative Senate, things haven't gotten to them. So now we're down to the wire. Now basically the temporary taxes passed in 2016 disappear at the end of June. And there's this fiscal cliff, which has been bigger. It's now down to about $650 million because the governor has made some cuts, and there has been some other revenue that has been kind of found, partly because of the tax bill up in Washington that kind of had a side effect of raising income taxes here. But what happened is there was a special session called early this year in the hopes that they would enact some taxes and then we would know what the revenue is expected to be and the legislature could pass a real budget during this session because they're not allowed to raise revenue during the regular session. That's not what happened, and there was a real question of whether we should even pass a budget because we're going to come back for a special session and try again. And legislators insisted on doing that. So now there is this pretend budget that nobody supports that has gone to the governor's desk. We don't really know what he's going to do with it, and it's weird because so many legislators ended up voting for something that they don't support, and it's an election year next year.
Like making cuts to Medicaid payments to patients in nursing homes.
What the House did is they absolutely slashed health care. They cut the safety net hospitals, medical education, and most dramatically, nursing homes, long-term care, basically programs that, support a lot of people in really important stuff. And then the governor put out these letters warning people who might be affected. He said he had to do that legally to, let them know that they might be qualified for other things. It scared a lot of people, obviously. The House members really got furious at him and said, no, he's playing politics, he's being dishonest. That's not the end of the story. But on the other hand, they passed this budget. So then it goes to the Senate. The Senate puts all that money back and says, see, you're safe, but then makes all these other cuts, including they dialed back TOPS more than the House had dialed back TOPS to 80%. The Senate dialed it back to 70%. And they went through and they basically cut 24% from all these other areas, including, food stamps were affected, parks and museums, state prisoners, higher ed. It's a bloodbath, basically.
So once again, that's
the budget that the House then concurred on and has been sent to the governor that nobody wants to adopt.
That they're going to need to now tackle in a special session to try to raise some revenue, which they're now saying the GOP, now we understand what cuts would be, but the governor
Sure.
said, no, I presented that to you in the first
We've
place.
understood for 2 years.
So
let's
we'll
be-
find out more.
yes.
But let's talk about what did happen in this regular
Okay.
session.
Some interesting things happened actually in a lot of different areas. One of the most dramatic was there were a couple of big criminal justice reforms that got through really without a lot of people expecting it. One is, we've talked about it on the show before, unanimous juries, basically, and this is going to go to the voters in the fall, to require a criminal conviction to be by a unanimous jury as opposed to just 10 members of the jury. And the second one actually just went through late in the session, and that is giving convicted felons on parole and probation the right to vote after 5 years. And I mean, I think these both kind of fit into the broader criminal justice movement rubric in a couple of ways. One, it really focuses on bringing, reducing prison population, bringing people who've served their time back into the mainstream, and they've both gotten support from across the political spectrum, which is really the most interesting part, that very conservative groups and very liberal groups are both supporting them.
Right, and quickly touching on also medical marijuana expansion.
We expanded
condition.
the specific conditions
Yeah,
that would
right.
apply for medical marijuana. The legislature passed a ban on abortion after 15 weeks. The governor is expected to sign that. That will be challenged legally. It already has in Mississippi. Very little gun legislation. There was kind of there were a bunch of bills filed after the Parkland shooting. At the beginning of the session, of course, we had another horrible shooting today. And they mostly didn't pursue either toughening gun laws or expanding access to guns, like the arming teachers. Both of those went away. They did pass allowing students to have bulletproof backpacks. That's pretty much what came out of that.
Okay, all righty.
Okay.
We'll be talking a little bit more about legislative action or lack thereof a little bit later in the show. Right
Okay.
now I'm going to go over to Michelle. And there was an incident this week in Jefferson Parish, a police arrest on a narcotics undercover investigation that ultimately was ruled a suicide. I mean, not a suicide, excuse me, a homicide.
Kevin Robinson was a 22-year-old man from Metairie. He apparently was the target of an undercover narcotics investigation. From the witnesses that worked at the service station, they were saying that the detectives were waiting for him when he got to that service station. Kevin apparently spotted them, got into his car, took off out of the service station. He hit two sheriff's office vehicles in a kind of a half-block chase. They didn't get very far. Then he got out of the car and climbed a couple of fences and ended up in the backyard of a home on LeVar Place in Old Jefferson, that's Shrewsbury neighborhood near Oxnard. And apparently during this struggle, and the sheriff, Lopinto, called it a fight. He said that they were definitely fighting. He stopped breathing. Detectives did CPR, they took him to Oxnard, but they could not revive him. Now, the day on the scene, Sheriff Lopinto said that he suspected that Kevin's death was related to a long history of asthma. That was something that he said that the family members had told them. And he thought that it was going to be some kind of medical condition. You'll remember that we had atmosphere warnings that day because of high ozone. But Dr. Jerry Satanovich, who's the coroner for the sheriff's office, did an autopsy that Saturday, and on Monday reported that his death was a homicide, which basically means that he died at the hands of another. It's not quite a murder. What a homicide is, it means it's not an accidental death, it's not a suicide, and it's not a natural death. You died at the hands of another person, and he died of compressional asphyxia. That is when something compresses. Usually, I've been told by use of force experts that they see it more when someone puts a knee on the back of a suspect. They call it positional asphyxia, when they're on the ground and there's a knee in the back. But in this case, the coroner said that Kevin Robinson had significant traumatic injuries to his neck. We don't know front or back, but that means there was some kind of pressure on his neck. There were 4 detectives who were involved in that, taking him into custody. They've been reassigned, which anyone who follows the sheriff's office knows that's a significant departure from the previous administrations. They usually, when there was some kind of death or a deputy-involved shooting, the deputies were allowed to stay, on the job. They weren't reassigned or anything. And they've opened a criminal investigation that involves state police and the FBI Civil Rights Task Force.
Family reaction to this?
The family was extremely angry. I think the fact that the sheriff talked about asthma on the first day, and then to have it come out and it's a homicide, that it enraged them. But it hasn't been that fiery response. But they want answers. They want to know. I particularly spoke with one relative on Wednesday, and she said, we've been led to believe that you only use deadly force when you feel your life is in jeopardy. At what point did the officers feel like their lives were in jeopardy?
Was he armed?
He had a gun in his car, according to the sheriff, but he got out of that vehicle and took off, so he wasn't armed at the scene of the struggle.
And there was a struggle, as you said. Lipinto really described it as a fight.
As a fight.
They were in a fight. So, and the coroner's report, as Coroner Dr. Stanovich said that there's more investigation that's going to go on, more testing, et cetera, that is still
right.
pending.
He said it's going to take a couple of weeks. What they're going to do is send off toxicology. They need to know if there was anything in his system that may have exacerbated his death. They're going to do lung slides to see what was happening with his lung function, because apparently he did have asthma. So what, if anything, did that play a role? But he said, I don't expect that to really change. We think that at the end of the day, the manner of death is going to be compressional asphyxia, and it's going to be a homicide.
And the names of the detectives?
The names of the detectives are floating out there. The sheriff's office has not officially released them, but they are for narcotics detectives. We know that at least 2 of them are being sued currently in federal court for excessive force.
For another case.
2, completely different cases.
Now, a side issue to this is body cameras. That none of them are wearing body cameras.
Right. The sheriff's office tested body cameras probably about 2 to 3 years ago. Newell Normand was sheriff at the time, and his opposition to it, he talked about how it doesn't show fully everything. You only see directly in front of you, so you can't see a threat to the side. That was one of his complaints. And then he talked about the cost to maintain the computer system to maintain the footage. Like, what would the public records law require? How long would you have to keep that video? Where do you store it? How much does it cost to have that kind of equipment? So he said that it was really cost prohibitive, is what he was saying.
And Sheriff Lipinto also noted that this was undercover, narcotics undercover. They wouldn't have a
They
body
wouldn't
cam
have been
on.
wearing it, he said.
All right. Thanks a lot, Michelle. Over to Dawn right now, and some fun news
I
for
was going
us.
to say a little more uplifting on this side of the table
over at
today.
City Park. Some really nice construction going on.
Well, some big changes to the park. I'm going to start with the slightly smaller ones. Currently, the Wisner bike path is in the process of being, we've talked for years about the Wisner Bridge that was finished, but there's also a bike path as part of all that that's being connected with all of the bike paths in City Park itself. That should be complete and connected in about a month. Exterior renovations are underway at the casino building in the park. And the Botanical Garden is ready to start construction in an outdoor kitchen, which will be a teaching area for healthy eating and healthy cooking in the park itself. The 2 big things, big changes both structurally and visually, are the construction of the Louisiana Children's Museum, which should open sometime in mid-2019, and then the doubling in size of the Sculpture Garden also should be complete in spring of next year. Both projects are helping improve the park in other ways in addition to themselves. They are cleaning out the muck in the lagoons near them, and that's what the park calls deferred maintenance kind of stuff that could have happened decades ago is finally happening. Tons of muck coming out from 4 to 5 feet of muck coming out from the bottom of those lagoons, which Bob Becker at the park told me will significantly improve the marine life there. It will be a much more sustainable, fish and plants and that sort of thing will do much better with those lagoons cleaned out. The Children's Museum is a 56,000 square foot facility moving from its Julia Street building where it's been for years to City Park, where they'll have 8 acres, both water exhibit right on the lagoon, some underwater, some decks, some walkways. It's a nearly $50 million facility, 56,000 square feet. Construction is already underway.
Where is it?
It is, so I can't, if you're
Near
coming.
Christian Brothers,
Yeah,
isn't
near
it?
Christian Brothers is the best way to say it. Kind of, there's the big lake in Christian Brothers, and then if you went straight through the big lake with Christian Brothers staying on your right, it's kind of right there at the next lagoon. Huge structure. Even though you'll see that the museum itself looks complete sooner than later, it takes a long time to put all those exhibits in. And there will be some new exhibits and some old favorites too. There will still be a grocery store. There will still be a display that's dedicated to life on the river. It's the first LEED certified building in City Park. LEED certified is leadership in energy and environmental design. It's being designed both by Methuen Architects out of Seattle and Wagner Ball locally. So it's significant that way. And then the sculpture garden is going across kind of that same path from where they currently are across what's the end of Roosevelt Mall to the other side, doubling in size. We'll have an amphitheater in it as well. So really a lot more in the park visually to come to and see, with activities for young and old and everybody in between.
I think the Children's Museum, if you drive by there, you can see like an architect's rendering. I think it's going to be looked upon as an important piece of architecture nationally. It's going to win the award. There's a lot of debate on selling on the architecture, but it's going to be an important building that people can look at. And then the interplay with the sculpture garden, because you'll be able to see
You'll
it
be
from
able to
parts of the
see it
sculpture
from
garden.
parts and walk through it to the Children's Museum. And it really, City Park, very eclectic architecture. You go from, how was it referred to me? Some sort of concrete, something terrible word actually, of Tad Gormley Stadium to like the Peristyle, to just very eclectic architecture throughout the park. And this is just more.
That sculpture garden is so beautiful, and to have it enlarged is really going to be pleasant. And you know, we got to teach our kids how to make groceries. That's a real important
Yes,
tip there in the Children's
exactly.
Museum.
We should update it for online groceries.
Do they deliver? Yes. Concrete brutalism, that's the word.
Concrete brutalism,
Of Tad
yeah,
Gormley
okay.
Stadium.
Thanks a lot, Don. We're going to go back over to Steph, and we talked about Harrah's wants to expand, and boy, they ran into some headwinds on this kind of unexpectedly.
Did it? Well, you know, first it was smooth sailing, which was also a little unexpected, I have to say. Basically, the Harrah's, they have another 6 years of their current arrangement, and they want to extend it 30 years. So it's kind of early for that. They got the Speaker of the House, Taylor Barra, to sponsor this measure. They came to New Orleans and the state and said, you know, we want to invest $350 million. We want to build another hotel. We want to cover that first block of Fulton Street, put in a high-end bar and food court and all these, you know, jobs. And it went through the House without a lot of questions, which was, again, interesting just because it's such a complex deal and because gambling debates are always so fraught. Then it ran into some headwinds in the Senate. There were some revelations that maybe, you know, there were some things that people didn't really understand, like the implications of what would happen if they were able to transfer to this real estate holding company, which is not unusual, but, you know, what does it mean for the larger deal? And really, you know, is this the best deal for the city and the state?
And the state,
How do you know? There wasn't an independent analysis. There were a lot of lobbyists hired. There was, you know, a full court press. So that, and you know, Senate President John Alaria was pretty skeptical. So it's been a big fight. So in the Senate basically said, we want more. We want, you know, an additional $30 million a year. That was cut out, and then they put back $20 million, and some other concessions they asked for that Harrah's and Caesars did not immediately agree to, and then it ended up kind of in the last day in a conference committee. And it's interesting because you have the Speaker of the House being the author, a very strong proponent, and you have John Alaria, the Senate President, being a skeptic, and they, you know, have to work it out or not. And you know what the Harrah's people are saying is, and what the supporters are saying is, if you don't pass it now, you might not get another chance. We might not come back with the $350 million. Others say, you probably will. We don't know. And again, even if this passes and if the governor signs it, the city council will still have to approve it. And I'm going to say this is a pretty tough city council we're seeing in the very early stages. So I kind of expect them to ask some tough questions too.
And this is something that Speaker Barra has been really supportive. I mean, strongly supportive.
And it's interesting because, you know, he's not a New Orleanian, obviously. Now, on the Senate side, the sponsor is Karen Carter Peterson, who is a New Orleanian. But yes, and my colleague Tyler Bridges did a story about all the lobbyists hired. You have 21 lobbyists. They hired Ryan Bernie, the former deputy mayor, to do communications. It's a really high-powered team.
But John Alario is sort of on the other side.
Pretty
He's not-
high-powered himself.
And he's really not
Yes.
too supportive of this, right?
Yes.
now.
So
in some
again,
of its forms.
it's coming down to the wire.
But you know, but the rules are changing for Harrah's too. Like when Harrah's first got the right to operate here, it was the sole land-based casino in Louisiana, other than the Indian casinos.
Right.
Right. Okay. And now you're seeing the dockside casinos saying, well, we want to
Which
be land.
is, and that passed. That's
Yeah,
something else
passed,
that happened in the
okay.
legislature.
And so they don't have that exclusiveness anymore.
They don't.
And so, and at the time, the fairgrounds didn't have slot machine gambling.
So they do have other competition now.
They do, but also they've
gotten a lot more competition.
They say there's enough demand that they want to build a new hotel. That's on the other side. So, yeah.
Well, some other competition is sports betting, although if sports betting would actually, it would be in the casinos, though.
It'd be this has been an interesting story. For years, the law has been that the only place you could have sports betting in the United States was in Nevada. That hardly seems legal, and the Supreme Court decided that it wasn't this week, and that changed it. But I think for years, the professional sports leagues wanted sports betting contained. They never put a team in Nevada, a professional team, because they always said, we don't want to be where sports betting is. But that's weakening. In fact, Las Vegas has a hockey team, and they have the chance it may get the Oakland Raiders. And so obviously the professional leagues are changing. But what happened this week is that the state of Chris Christie in the state of New Jersey had a lawsuit and said, we should be allowed to have sports betting too. I mean, Atlantic City has a big gambling scene. And the Supreme Court agreed and said, essentially, you can have sports betting anywhere in the country that you wanted. Well, the people of Mississippi saw this coming, and they passed a law. The law was already in place, even before the Supreme Court. And so conceivably, you're going to have sports betting like really soon in Mississippi. I mean, they've got all the infrastructure in place, and so it can be only like weeks away.
And what happened here is that Danny Martini, the state senator, proposed a bill in this session, and also seeing this coming, and it did not pass. That would have set up local options all over the state this fall.
It didn't even get past committee.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now people will be having second thoughts because now that it's passed, and what's going to be happening? We're going to be hearing, in a matter of months, all kind of stories about people from Louisiana going to Mississippi to be doing sports betting, which is the same thing that tipped the hand for having casinos in Louisiana. At first there was resistance to casinos in Louisiana until you heard all the stories about people from Louisiana going to Mississippi.
And the Supreme Court ruling came down just as the governor was putting together the special session call, and there were people who asked him, and he considered including it. Should we hurry and try to do something quickly? And he ultimately decided not to because he wanted to focus on the budget. But he seems like he kind of likes the idea. So it will take longer, but
it seems to me like something that's going to happen one day, but it won't be one day soon because it probably won't be in this session. It won't be in the special session, and so it's going to have to wait till next year. Yep. And then in Louisiana, we have a law saying that if you want to expand gambling, then the parish that's affected by it has to approve it too. Now, probably all of them would approve it, but still, that's just another period of time that you have to wait. And so it may be a few years in most places before you have sports betting. And the proponents of it are saying, well, the casinos could just lose money because of this, because people can go elsewhere. But it's going to be something new locally, and it's going to probably change the way that people look at sports, because now you're really thinking about stopping on the way and placing your sports bets. So it's going to be different.
And placing it legally.
Yes.
Certainly.
Right. They've been betting for a long time.
Back in the old days when you had the bookies,
Back
when
in
you
the
had
old
the
days.
bookies, it was illegal, but the authorities kind of looked in the other direction.
Right.
Okay, and now it'll be legal, and the authorities will be betting too.
But not in Louisiana for a while. We're going
So-
to have a bit of a wait.
Have to go to Mississippi.
going to get the jump on us on that one. Okay, over to Steph. LaToya Cantrell apparently changed her mind about a possible appointment.
For very familiar face for Police Superintendent Warren Riley, who served under Ray Nagin from kind of a couple weeks after Katrina until the end, has been actually working for FEMA in the interim. And LaToya Cantrell decided that she wanted to hire him to oversee all Homeland Security, including emergency response, also police. It turns out she offered him the job. He accepted it. He had been in official meetings. And when word got out that she was thinking about it, there was a real backlash. And that had to do with largely the Danziger Bridge case, which Warren Riley was not in charge. He was chief of operations, I believe, at the time, but he was not the superintendent when the shootings happened right after Katrina. This is, of course, the shootings of innocent unarmed civilians and 2 deaths and horrible case. But he was around for the cover-up, and there was kind of a long cover-up. And the complaint about him is that he kind of didn't seem all of that engaged in figuring out what happened at the time. He admitted he didn't read the report. You know, the other thing that was happening at the time is, of course, the police force was really in disarray, and when Megan left and Mitch Landrieu came in, the Justice Department had assembled evidence of all of these civil rights violations. They would have taken very drastic action if Mitch Landrieu had not entered into the consent decree that we're still under. So Police Chief Harrison, who LaToya Cantrell is retaining, has been kind of overseeing compliance with the consent decree. He's gotten good marks on that, and this would have been weird because it would have put Warren Riley over him. So finally, after a lot of pressure, she announced this week that he would not be, the job offer was rescinded.
A job offer he had accepted at $180,000 a year was the agreed upon salary.
Exactly, and I mean, she didn't sound happy about it. He didn't sound happy. She basically said, "I still think he's uniquely qualified. People have almost, post-traumatic." She didn't use the phrase PTSD, but people haven't really come to terms with still traumatized by this. So it was almost like she still thought it was a good decision. And then he put out a statement also through a lawyer saying, "I'm very disappointed. I had accepted the job. I had gone through all these steps."
So her first responses were, first, he was on a short list, and
Yes.
then days later it was, well, we're putting this on pause, and then ultimately.
Right, and he was in town. He had gone to meetings. I mean, he had taken the drug test. He had really filled out the forms. It was a done deal.
So he's none too pleased about
So
this.
he's not pleased, and that job, it's not a job that you definitely need filled immediately. It's, I think this left some hard feelings.
All righty, Steph. All right, time to look ahead. Darryl?
Well, if you imagine what was the Copeland's on Veterans Highway towards the 17th Street Canal End, it's been closed for a while. It was a big restaurant, and so there's obviously been some activity, and the activity is this could be a Ramsey's Jewelry, which is sort of an unusual trade, a jewelry store for a big restaurant, but that'll be coming to veterans.
That could still please a lot of people, that's for sure.
Something else the legislature did, they passed a bill by, again, Danny Martini, to ban inclusionary zoning. That is what New Orleans wants to do, Baton Rouge maybe wants to do, to require developers of apartment complexes to include affordable housing. The governor, we asked him about it, he sounds like he's kind of on the fence. The cities would really like him to veto it. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be interesting.
That will be an interesting decision on his part,
Yeah.
definitely. All right.
From City Park to downtown Duncan Park, the Downtown Development District is working with the city to revamp Duncan Plaza outside City Hall, and it is becoming Duncan Park. There are yoga classes and food truck Fridays and things like that going on there now, but it's a period of public input right now to what New Orleans want to make of that park. There's money ready to do dog parks and other things there, so to make it really a neighborhood park.
Good downtown park.
Nothing goes better with yoga than a food truck.
Right, Michelle.
We're hovering on today. We're getting more information about the arrest of former Kenner mayoral candidate Donna Reyno. She's the wife of Kenner City Councilman Keith Reyno, and apparently she was arrested last night at Boomtown Casino when she got into some kind of brawl with another man there. They accused her of being intoxicated, taking her high heel shoes off, charging at him, punching him in the face, and tussling with him on the floor.
All right. Is there video on this?
There
any
is
on that?
video.
It was all because of line dancing? That was
It was
the
all
argument?
because of line dancing.
Okay, we'll be seeing how that one turns out. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.